Now to my colleague, Mr. Cullen.
It's interesting. Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Welcome, Minister. It's interesting because the flaw of the design was somewhat exposed when the clerk of the Privy Council sat in front of a Justice Committee and then ended up resigning because, as he said in his letter, he had lost the faith of the other political parties, which was inherently one of our concerns with the design of your process going into something so sensitive as an election and the decisions that get made, whether to divulge there's been a hack of a political party or not, can sway an election, as you would imagine, one way or the other. To Mr. Boucher, just a quick question. You've said in your recent report, which confirms a report from almost 2 years ago, that hacking into our elections is, I think the term your agency used was very likely in terms of foreign cyber attack. Is that right?
Attempts of foreign interference into elections is very likely.
And what we've seen in the past in the US, in the UK, in France has been one of the points of attack has been political party databases. Is that correct?
That is.
That is also true for Canada?
The intent or the methods by which the opponents are going to try to address foreign interference definitely includes the political parties' key information.
Because that key information, those databases, voter information, voter preferences, if somebody's looking to interfere in a Canadian election, getting access to those databases would help weaponize their lies, I suppose, or weaponize their attempts to interfere. Is that a fair point to draw?
Absolutely, and that's why we engage so proactively with the parties, so they can actually prepare themselves and detect and react.
Right, and you're providing that valuable advice, but there's nothing required under law, under the recent elections changes that this government brought in, to make those parties fall under, say, something like PIPEDA, that there's a legal standard of how to protect that vital information. Is that correct?
I can say that within the current method of work, the parties have been engaging with us. They've been taking hold of what the important measures are and actually taking action.
My question is there anything required under law in terms of the standard of protection for that information?
Not to my knowledge.
Right. So, Minister, why not? You had a report more than a year and a half ago warning of this as the point source of threat to the democracy, or the democratic institutions minister. The Standing Committee on Privacy and Ethics recommended this to you, that parties should be brought in and required by law to have this standard of protection to keep our elections safe. You chose not to do that. The advice is great. The council, the working with the parties is great. But you chose not to do that. Why not?
So we specifically chose to develop this relationship between CSE and the political parties because political parties have, they're separate from government. They're unique in terms of how they engage with Canadians. And it's important for them to have that independence, I believe, and I think you would agree with me on that. And that's why we chose to go down this route, to ensure that we were providing the advice to political parties. It's how they choose to use it, but particularly from a security point of view, to give them the best advice and the best tools available to protect their databases and their information.
We're talking about the safety of our elections. On the safety of our roads, we don't give drivers advice and let them choose how fast to drive. We give them speed limits because we know there's a danger in going above certain speeds. We know from your own report that you asked for from the CSE a year and a half, 18 months ago, 20 months ago now, that there was a threat, a credible threat, and that one of the access points was this. And you said, drive at whatever speed you like. Here's some advice that you should only drive this fast, but there's nothing required. And that's what concerns me going into this election that's just a few months away. A question about social media. You suggested that you were disappointed with the lack of action from the social media agencies in terms of hate speech, banning certain groups. Facebook went and banned a few, which is a good first start, but there's many more. And those groups, Faith Goldie and the others, had been existing on spreading that hate for years. You expressed disappointment, and you also suggested that Europe, they'd done more in the European context. Europe has laws. Europe is bringing in regulations. England has introduced some more regulations, rules to guide the social media agencies.
Well, they've introduced a white paper to discuss them. And I would say with regards to the regulations, actually what's going on in the EU with social media platforms is that's a voluntary code of practice that the social media platforms have undertaken themselves. And that was basically the conversation that we've been having them if they would do the same thing here in Canada.
They're not.
But they, to date, they have decided that that's not something that they want to pursue. However, those conversations are ongoing, and I would say that after the comments on Monday, there has been a renewed interest in having a conversation about what they will do here in Canada.
I understand all that, but if you look at the main differences between Canada and the European Union, the European Union has done much more in legislation than Canada has.
Well, so Canada is the
very
first
brief-
allow me
country.
to
Canada is
briefly,
the
Minister.
first.
Sorry, I haven't actually finished my question.
Oh, but your time's up.
Thank you for the advice. So Europe has actually brought in regulations and rules, and social media groups have actually responded.
And
You
so
seem
has
naive
Canada.
and disappointed that they haven't
But
done the
so
same
has
thing
Canada,
here.
Mr. Cullen. So Canada, what we did in C76 is we are the first jurisdiction to require online platforms to have an online ad registry. And actually there has been response from that. So Facebook is doing their ad library. Google has actually said that they will not have political ads here in Canada, and we're still waiting to hear from Twitter. So when you talk about regulation, in fact, Canada has acted, and we were a first movement. Political ads are what we saw, particularly in the U.S. election, particularly in the British referendum, one of the primary tools with regards to foreign interference using online mechanisms. So this is a really important step, and it's an important method for transparency and to protect our elections.
Okay, thank you. Madame Lapointe.